Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Warm greetings from Bogor. It's great to see you all in this virtual event, and I hope that all of you are well and stay safe in this pandemic. I'm Anggraini from IPB University. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Environmental and Resource Economics, Faculty of Economics and Management, and also serve as the head of the study program on tropical ocean economics, where we manage master and doctoral programs in this field. It is my honor to moderate the today's lecture, which is the second part of joint lecture series initiated by IPB University and Monash University, Australia. I believe that this collaboration will be beneficial for students, lecturers, and researchers from both universities. And I also would like to thank our Dean, Professor Nunung Nuriartono, who also attends this lecture. So today's lecture, we take the topic of ocean economics and public policy. So I assume that many of us has listened or read the recent issues on territorial dispute on South China Sea that involves many countries, and also like recently USA shows big interest in this dispute. So what does this story tell us? This is actually the background of this lecture, because the conflict is driven by multifaceted interests, not only economy, as we know that the South China Sea contains oil and natural gas, fish, but also due to the important function in terms of geostrategy and geopolitics of the region. So this situation informs us the signal, the need of strong policy of countries, particularly countries who have territorial area, that should enhance the economy, the ocean economy and policy to for the sake of the sovereignty of the country. So to learn more and to discuss more about this topic, today we have already two prominent speakers, Professor Tridoyo from IPB University and Professor Deirdre from Monash University. So Professor Tridoyo Kusumastanto will be talking about ocean economics and 7 sectors within the ocean economy, and also will share with us experiences and how to implement the public policy and to influence the public policy in ocean field. And Professor Deirdre today we'll be talking about the policy, the public policy, how to design, implement it, and to make impact. And also we'll share her experience on public policy, mainly related on climate change and its impact in various sectors. So let's start to the session of the lecture. So I will invite Professor Tridoyo to deliver the speech. Yes, I'm so sorry that I forgot something, that I have to read the CV of the two speakers. Okay, Professor Tridoyo Kusumastanto, he graduated with PhD degrees in applied economics from Auburn University and also Alabama, an executive education program in innovation for economic development, Harvard University, USA. He is a professor of ocean economics and policy and founder graduate program in tropical ocean economics, and also MBA program in port, shipping, and logistics management business school in IPB. He was the director of Center for Coastal and Marine Resource Studies. He was a member of Indonesian Ocean Council and the chair of Indonesian National Ocean Policy, Indonesia Ocean Act and National Blue Economy Policy. So this we show that his influence is in the public policy. He was a regional expert on resource and environmental economics of South China Sea project and chairman of sustainability coastal and marine management and international port management programs in cooperation with CDG and Inwen, and also cooperation coordinator with Kagoshima University, Japan. And he has published books, scientific journals, and papers in the topic of integrated coastal management, integrated river basin, coastal and ocean management, ocean resource economics, ocean policy, ocean economics, maritime economics, and ocean governance. So these are his research interest and area. So the second speakers is Associate Professor Deirdre O'Neill. So she is the course director of the Master of Public Policy at Monash University, where she teaches public policy and public sector reform. She has published extensively on a wide range of public management and public policy, including privatization, performance measurements, and so on. She is also the author of 2 books, including Business, Government, and Globalization, published by Paragraph Macmillan. Professor O'Neill has designed and delivered many programs for senior government officials in Australia, China, Indonesia, and some countries in South Asia and the Pacific. Most recently, she developed with colleagues from Monash an executive development program for senior officials in the Ministry of Village Development and Disadvantaged Regions and Transmigration, which was delivered in Jakarta last year. So her leadership roles have included chairing a national review of the public sector management program and Australia-wide qualification for public sector employees in all Australian jurisdictions. Her PhD was from Monash University, addresses the challenge of administrative reform, and she is an academic fellow of the Australia and New Zealand School of Government. So now we come to the lecture session. I would like to invite Professor Tridoyo Kusumastanto to deliver the lecture first, and then followed by Professor O'Neill. Professor Tridoyo, time is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Eva Anggraini, my dear colleagues, Associate Professor Deirdre O'Neill, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon to you all. Hope you are all in a good health. Today, I would like to share idea with you in my topics: economic challenge on sustainability of the ocean. First, I would like to start with the theory said by Alfred Mahan. It was a long time ago, but still relevant. It was in 1819, actually. So the theory called sea power theory. It states that national greatness and prosperity and power associated with ocean. And other important proverb is ancient proverb. It called whoever rules the wave rules the world. So this word is true ever since 16th century, when some countries colonize other countries. Even now in the Revolution 4.0 era, the word is still valid. As you may notice in South China Sea now, territorial dispute between China and neighboring countries, Southeast Asia, Japan, and bring also the tension of US. The tension now using sea power, this is military, especially Navy, and Air Force. So the geopolitical, geostrategy of the ocean become very important to the world. The role of the ocean is not only physical, but also economic. And as I mentioned, why South China Sea is important. South China Sea important, the statutory value, 3.4 trillion US dollar per year, total trade passing through South China Sea. And 40% of liquid natural gas trade transited through South China Sea. See, as you can see, the sustainability of the Earth also depends on ocean. As you can see from the slide, ocean cover more than 70% of the Earth's surface, and the majority of life in Earth is aquatic. That means ocean is marine mega biodiversity. Less than 5% of the planet's ocean has been only 5%. So ocean resource and function have a huge of economic value. Ocean also important for food, medicine, and energy, and more importantly, 70% of our planet oxygen is produced by the ocean. As you can see, the role of ocean and the Earth system. The ocean regulates the temperature, atmospheric composition, so development, evaporation, and precipitation, which is important for maintaining plant to grow and provide food for human and animals. So ocean also regulate the temperature around the globe. Circulation of the heat by flowing current from the north as a cold, salty deep current to south of the Australia, going up through Indonesia, become warm, less salty, shallow current, go to the north as a Gulf Stream. This disruption of this circulation could cause rapid climate change due to the change in the distribution of heat across the globe. So, the sustainability of the Earth is dependent and contributed by the sustainability of the ocean. From the next graph, we can see not only the physical function, geopolitical function, and also geostrategy function, the important role of ocean in world economic growth. Let me show you in this graph. The increasing world merchandise trade, as we can see here, the increase of world merchandise trade mostly coming from what we call it world cross seaboard trade. That means goods and service passing through the ocean. This contribution will impact to development of gross domestic product of the world. As I mentioned, next. As mentioned before, that the role of ocean economic for the development of the world, I divide by two big categories, which are maritime economics and marine resource economics. Why I divide become two categories? I studied this ocean economy start in 1995, and that was nobody actually using the keyword of ocean economy. But I start study this sector, doing research, and also talk to many government institutions and also people community, of course, the political party. So why different? As you see that the two major is marine economics and the other is maritime economy. Why is different? On this marine resource economy, we input physical property. See, suppose in this case, we are using, I would using a simple mathematical equation. It's production function. Y is a production function of x1 until xn. So x1 is the input factor and the x is the output. So in marine resource economy, this value for the input is coming from physical property. That one is different with maritime economy. The shipping economy is not the physical property input. They're using only water column. The water column, see water column passing through the vessel, suppose like IMX vessel container, 18,000 of TUs, then food equivalent unit, then there's no or limited input from physical. In that case, we can see a difference between maritime and marine resource economy. As you may see also, the international maritime trade, so to differentiate is about maritime economy. So the unit is different. So they are using cargo ton miles. See, the cargo ton miles, and this is multiplied by US dollar or rupiahs, and will be in monetary terms. And we can see for marine resource economy, suppose, for example, production of fish. So the input is coming, that we use aquaculture. So if you produce shrimp, the input factor is coming from seedling or seed fry, and another will be fertilizer or feed, or also environment, the quality of water quality. So there is an input factor is physical property. So both become one, what I call it ocean economy. How important ocean for Indonesia? So ocean is the important vision for Indonesia. Sustainability of country and also the supply food for 267 million of Indonesians is coming from very fast of water. So I superimpose the map of Indonesia with Europe. From the west to the east is covered by water. It's the same in Europe from UK to Iraq. And as you may see also, this is Poland to Tunisia from the north to the south. It's the same with Indonesia, but covered by water. Europe is continent. So this is very important for Indonesia, especially in terms of geopolitics, geostrategy, and of course the key economy. As you may look at the long coastline, the second longest in the world, number of islands, and also the area is around 5.8 million kilometers. This territory will include also economic zone. I did study start 95 contribution to Indonesia. So there are 7 ocean sector economy. So the highest contribution in 2015 is coming from ocean infrastructure. So it could be port and maritime logistics and others related with service. And it's different compared to 1995. The highest contribution at that time, 95, is ocean energy and mineral resources. So there is shifting of economic structure in ocean economy. And we can check what is the efficiency of investment in ocean economy in Indonesia. So you can see here using a simple mathematics. I can call it as ICOR. So the ICOR is ICOR is actually a simple mathematics. ICOR is actually delta is investment divided by delta output. So that means the lower ICOR index, the more efficient investment. The two highest ICOR is one fisheries, and the second is marine tourism and recreation. See? You can see for this is to renewable resources. These two sectors maintaining the sustainability of the ocean. You can come to Indonesia to see how beautiful of coral reef. You can go in Raja Ampat, or you can go to Akabonerate or Bunaken. It's really beautiful, beautiful beach. So why the marine tourism is low? Because the investment is coming from Almighty God. See, so these two relates. You can have candlelight dinner in Bali. if you have a beautiful scenery of the beach with sunset, but if there are no, well, you maybe enjoy lobster, barbecue lobster, or fish lobster, then that's beautiful life. The other thing is also related with how the ocean economy absorbing rate. So this can be right as incremental labor output ratio, delta labor divided by delta output. In this case, the higher labor, the better absorbing manpower. So in this case also, it's around 9 to 13 is 2 renewable resource. It's the highest of either. Then we continue with the next presentation. How the only Indonesia share on world ocean economy of the world. So with the vast area, unfortunately right now, the contribution of ocean economy is relatively small. So you can see container throughput is only 1% of the world. And of course, the fleet ownership is only 1%. So it needs policy to develop the ocean economic growth to support the Indonesian economy. So what happened in the future? So we can see more uncertain factors. We have problem with shifting in globalization, United States-China trade sanction and tension, and also environmental concern. This includes pollution of the ocean, plastic and other things that are just throw to garbage. No, be careful. Don't throw it to the water. So you should take care of it to become a zero waste. And the geopolitics, as I mentioned, one example is South China Sea. And right now we are facing a global pandemic, COVID-19. So the impact of this global pandemic of COVID-19 is really very big impact. Very big impact. So the growth of global is forecast is minus. And you can see also the decreasing of China's crude tanker demand starts around 3 billion deadweight ton nautical mile. And after corona outbreak decrease, start in January and then in February 14, 2020 is only almost 0.5. So crude oil has become the engine of growth of China. So this big impact on the pandemic is concern for us how to develop a policy. See, we can see the activity of port from EAPH. So vessel count decrease. See, and consider container vessel is only, see here, is only 39%. And other cargo vessel is only 44%. See, then for the passenger vessel, 70%. And others criteria is decreasing. Then the impact is the economic growth. The impact of economic growth, you can imagine, is very huge. From IMF data member, world real gross domestic product is decreased significantly. See, from 1980 to 2020. So it predicted that world real gross domestic product growth for advanced economy will be -5 or more. And for emerging market and developing economies is around -1 to -2. So in average, the world will be around -2 until -3%. You can imagine it must be strong policy to bring it back, the economic growth and the welfare of the people. And when we're dealing with policy, we are talking about how to balance the policy. So this is related with the challenge, how balancing of the policy in terms of capacity, is carrying capacity, and also the economic growth. So the issue of policy will be unsustainable ocean use, climate change and pollution, food and health crisis, and resource shortage, especially when many pollution thrown in the ocean, plastic, oil, and everything, just the vision like ocean is garbage. No, don't do it. From now on, the sustainability of the ocean is our task together. So we would like to develop what we call it blue technology, because we're improving some indicator from green economics, which should be zero waste, multiple cash flow by innovation, economic sharing with digital technology. This includes also blockchain, Internet of Things, robotics, artificial intelligence. So then will be the economic more efficient compared with the technology before, and we develop what we call it society 5.0. So this technology should help the better life of the people. So we consider at least three triple threat. So to developing a policy toward ocean sustainability. First is problem of climate change. And the second is natural resource constraint, including food and energy. And because of the pandemic now, financial crisis. So the government all over the world should give the economic stimulus, and we call it also using blue economy statement. It should be zero waste, technology efficient, and innovation to develop a strong cash flow by using technology. Then this policy must be put in connected and integrated, should be short, mid, and long-term strategy. What the indicator of policy should be considered and developing ocean sustainability? One is economic and society, which include investing for new opportunity, using revolution industry for revolution 4.0, and should be in sustainable activities. And the society must be promoting well-being, equal access to service and resources. These two should be compressed in one, space equity. In our Tropical Ocean Economic Study Program, Master and PhD in IPB University, it's called Spatial Economy of the Ocean. Many our PhD students right now are doing spatial economy of the coastal marine ocean. And the second two indicators is environment. This is preserving ecosystem and their potential maintaining of the sustainability of the environment. And important thing is culture, how people behave, how efficient they use the resources, how they consider also the efficiency using input, and pollution must be not just thrown into the ocean. So this should be a development of common understanding and also integrated vision. Why this is important is regarding time equity. This is managing inhabitant today and for our next generation. So generation to come. Both the four indicators comprised in two big criteria become a policy making. This is to foster ocean governance and sustainability, to get the blue society. Why? Because blue is nice, ocean is blue, but our heart is not blue. So ocean sustainability and new opportunity for all. So that's end my presentation. This is site. I put the picture. This our demonstration site. Is blue economy. And this is technology in aquaculture. We call it as sea farming. Please enjoy the scenery. So this is now the technology we are using. Revolution Industry 4.0. We can control the sea farming, aquaculture, lobster, shrimp in the area from Bogor, it's around 8 kilometers. So this is our research in blue economy concept. Terima kasih. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I give the time and space to Eva. Please, it's your time.
Thank you very much, Professor Tridoyo, for the nice lecture. In the short time you have provided us with a clear concept on ocean economics, and particularly on blue ocean economics and the importance of the policymakers, public policy to this field to address various forms of uncertainty, COVID-19, the global recently, and also the future, of course. So the next lecture will be delivered by Professor O'Neill. Professor O'Neill, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Eva, and thank you for your introduction. Thank you, Pak Tri, for your very, very interesting presentation. I found it fascinating, and I hope that what I will present this afternoon will complement and add to your presentation. So thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone in the audience. Thank you for joining us in this lecture today. I'm really, really delighted to be here. So I'm going to start putting up my slides now, but essentially in his presentation, Pak Tri has alerted us to the importance of climate change and the need for policy to develop in response to this. So my lecture today is around on public policy in terms of participation, influence, and impact. And while I'm going to be speaking in some general terms about these, I'd like to sort of draw on the Australian experience of climate change policy. And you are probably familiar with some recent events in Australia which have been of some great concern. There have been very, very serious bushfires late last year and early this year. These bushfires were of great intensity and duration, and were really quite unprecedented in the size and scope of them. These bushfires came after a period of prolonged drought. And again, this was very, very serious. And then, strangely, there are also floods. So Australia has experienced a lot of extremes in terms of these events, and there is a clear need for a coherent policy response to climate change. But unfortunately, in Australia, we have not had a consensus across our political parties about how governments should respond to climate change. So unlike other countries, there isn't agreement about the best way to proceed. And indeed, there's actually a lot of division. So I'm going to show you in the next slide how the public's opinion on climate change in Australia has changed over a period of 12 years, starting in 2006. And you'll see in 2006, there are actually 3 lines on this graph. The top one in 2006 is people responding to the proposition that global warming is a serious and pressing problem, and we should begin taking steps now, even if this involves significant costs. That's the dark line. The light blue line is people responding to the proposition the problem of global warming should be addressed, but its effects will be gradual. So we can deal with the problem gradually by taking steps that are low in cost. And the orange line is the proposition that until we are sure that global warming is really a problem, we should not take any steps that would have economic costs. Now, what is really interesting about the 2006 on that slide is that nearly 70% of Australians acknowledge that that climate change or global warming is a serious and pressing problem, and were prepared to pay significant costs themselves, even to address it, right? So they were saying it's serious. We understand responding will be costly. We're prepared to pay that. Nearly 70%. Around 25% was saying, yes, it's an issue, but, you know, look, let's not overdo it, but, you know, we can do things that maybe don't cost too much. And then right down the bottom there, we've got under 10%, probably about 7% of people saying it's not really a problem. We don't know that it's really a problem. We're not going to do anything, and certainly not anything that costs anything. But in 2006, there's a really strong majority of people in Australia saying, let's get on and do something. But the problem was that the Prime Minister at the time, John Howard, didn't really want to do anything about climate change. And indeed, Australia was one of only 2 countries in the world, developed countries in the world, that had not signed the Kyoto Protocol, the other country being the United States. So we were really outliers in terms of being part of the response to climate change. However, Prime Minister Howard's political opponent at the time, the leader of the Kevin Rudd, made climate change a big political issue. And in a speech in 2007, he announced that climate change was the great moral challenge of our time. So he's not the Prime Minister, but he wants to be Prime Minister. And he's saying this is really important and we should do something about it. So 5 months later, Kevin Rudd becomes Prime Minister. He's in the election. And the first thing that he does is he makes sure that Australia signs the Kyoto Protocol. It's the first official act of his government. So this is really reinforcing a message. And only a couple of months later, at the beginning of 2008, he also declares that Australia has to be a global leader in the response to climate change. So when we look at this graph, we can see that from 2006 to 2008, there's actually been a bit of tapering off around climate change in terms of being prepared to pay significantly to address it. And there's been a bit of an increase in the number of people who are saying, well, let's do something, but let's not pay too much. Kevin Rudd introduced in August 2009 a proposal to the Australian Parliament to introduce what was effectively an emissions trading scheme. In other words, he would use market forces to strongly encourage people acting in the marketplace to reduce carbon emissions. They would be rewarded. If your carbon emissions were too high, you would be punished. So this is what he brought to the Parliament. It was defeated in the Parliament by a combination of the Conservative opposition, but also the Greens Party. Now, the Greens Party is the environmental party in Australia, and it voted against the emissions trading scheme, really on the grounds that for them, it didn't do enough. Now, interestingly, Prime Minister Rudd's political opponent by then was Malcolm Turnbull. He was the leader of the opposition. And Malcolm Turnbull believed in climate change and wanted to see action. And so he offered to compromise with the government and suggested that they put up another proposal into the Parliament, which he would support. But by this stage, climate change policy in Australia had become very politicised and was being used to great effect by opponents of doing anything about it. So the upshot was that Malcolm Turnbull lost his job as leader of the opposition and was replaced by Tony Abbott, who was opposed to changes in relation to climate change, bringing in anything like an emissions trading scheme. He was a climate sceptic. And so the bill was defeated again. So Kevin Rudd then announced that after these 2 defeats, that he would delay taking further action for at least another year. He wouldn't try to introduce new legislation. So, not surprisingly, this created a great deal of unrest in the community. You know, one moment, climate change was the greatest moral challenge of our generation. The next moment, almost, it could be deferred for 12 months while the government worked out what it was going to do. And so Mr. Rudd lost a lot of credibility in this process. And in June 2010, he was replaced as Prime Minister by Julia Gillard. So you can see during this period that there's been a fairly steady decline in the proportion of Australians seeing climate change as being something really significant and wanting to pay to do something about it, and actually an increasing number of Australians saying it's not an issue, we shouldn't be spending anything or doing anything to the economy. We don't believe in climate change. Julia Gillard did bring in legislation that passed that was aimed at reducing carbon pollution and shifting the Australian economy to a clean energy future. But what she brought in was characterised by her political opponents as a carbon tax, another tax on the community. People were all being made to pay for it, supposedly, and it was exploited. And the opposition campaigned relentlessly against this so-called carbon tax. Now, for a number of reasons, probably not related to climate change, the Gillard government was defeated in 2013, and the new Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, promptly repealed Julia Gillard's climate change legislation and proclaimed that he had repealed the carbon tax. In 2015, for other reasons, Tony Abbott was also replaced as Prime Minister, and this by Malcolm Turnbull. And Malcolm Turnbull, who, as I said just a little while back, was very strongly in favour of doing something about climate change, had done a deal with his party members that if he became Prime Minister, he would retain Tony Abbott's climate change policy or non-policy, and so not much happened. But eventually, Prime Minister Turnbull proposed something called a National Energy Guarantee, and this guarantee was aimed at energy retailers across Australia, many of whom are private companies, and they were asked to supply energy in sufficient quantities in a reliable way, because there'd been a number of power outages in Australia that had caused a lot of political embarrassment. And the energy retailers were also told that they would be expected to reduce emissions between 2020 and 2030. Now, even that was too much for the members of Malcolm Turnbull's party. And in 2018, in August 2018, he was overthrown as Prime Minister and replaced by Scott Morrison, who is our current Prime Minister. Mr. Morrison says that he believes in climate change, but has not as yet made any statement or commitment about reducing emissions. So you can see that there's been, changing fortunes for climate change policy in Australia. Very high support for taking serious action in 2006, dipping to a low in 2012, and gradually building up again, so that by 2018, it was back to nearly 60%. I think if we had figures that brought us up to the present day after the events of last summer, we would see that that figure has increased again. But in this sort of story of climate change in Australia, I think that there are a number of lessons that can be drawn from it. It's a story of failure, but you can learn a lot from policy failure. So I'm just now, in the remainder of my presentation, I'm going to mention some of these lessons. Okay, so the first one is that good intentions are not enough in terms of making successful public policy. I don't doubt that Kevin Rudd had really good intentions where climate change is concerned, but he didn't succeed. Well, and why not? I've given some explanations, but the policy arena is very crowded. There's a lot of actors who want to get the attention of government, who want to get resources from government, who want governments to legislate or make decisions that are favourable to their interests and what they see as being good for the community. It's also true to say that access to government is unequal. Governments change. Some governments will provide better access for some members of the community than others. When governments change, a new group of people will have better access than they had previously. So it's not, we can't see it as being a completely, what we would call a level playing field in terms of access. Those closest to power usually exercise the most influence, and they are the people who are working with government, the people who are in government agencies and government advisory councils and boards. They're the ones who will have, they're working with, talking to government ministers and officials all the time. Obviously, they'll have a lot of influence. And then another factor, of course, is that public interest is not sustained in the longer term. Public cannot maintain a sort of a high level of interest indefinitely in one issue. Other crises will come along. Other things will distract them. And that is exactly what we saw in Australia, is that a very high level of interest in 2006 declined over time. Other things would have intervened. The global financial crisis, for example, would have been one factor. So public interest cannot be taken for granted, and generally, it's only going to be there at a very high level for a short period of time. A second lesson is that opportunities to change policy are actually quite rare. Governments generally prefer and like the status quo. It's easier for them to manage. It's, changes, if they change the status quo, there'll be winners and losers, and that creates issues for them. They don't want to do that. The status quo may not be perfect, but the status quo often can be accepted and tolerated. So the status quo tends to start from a fairly favourable position. There's also a limit to the number of issues that can be addressed at any given time. Governments do not have the resources, do not have the sort of physical resources or the financial resources and even the intellectual resources to address a limitless number of issues. They need to focus, they can only do so much, and that's the reality. It's also difficult to change policy because getting consensus is also, it's hard to achieve it, and we saw that in Australia. There was never any consensus, and there still isn't consensus around climate change, whether it's real, whether what we're seeing is part of something that's been going on for thousands of years, or whether it's been accelerated by, in the last several decades. There just isn't agreement. A further factor is that change is risky. Governments are notoriously risk averse, and so change brings risk with it. So that is something that governments will weigh up. There is no guarantee that decisions they take will be successful, that predicted outcomes will occur. And so if that is to be the case, well, it's risky. And then, as we saw in Australia, political fortunes of key players rise and fall. So Australia went through a period which was really very unusual in terms of our political history, where in the space of something like, well, really only about 10 years or so, we went from Prime Minister Rudd to Prime Minister Gillard to Prime Minister Abbott to Prime Minister Turnbull to Prime Minister Morrison. This is unheard of in Australia, but it happened. And so people who are working in policy areas can't assume that the person who they think will be their policy champion is necessarily going to be there when the opportunity presents itself to do something. This can't be taken for granted. So a third lesson that we can draw from this is that change is possible when policy windows open. So policy windows is a term that comes from the policy literature. John Kingdon has written a lot about these. And what the policy window represents, of course, is the opportunity to do something. And that opportunity to do something can come about when circumstances change. So something very dramatic happens, what Kingdon calls a focusing event. When that happens, when, for example, the bushfires that we had last summer, that would be a focusing event. The drought, some sort of catastrophe is very characteristically, permits that opportunity for action. But that's not all you need. I mean, you have the catastrophe, but other things need to come together in the right way. The policy problem needs to be there and be recognised. There should also be a plausible solution to this policy problem. And the prevailing political climate has to be accepting of this solution. So the three things need to be there. What we often see in public policy is recognition of a problem, but absence of a solution or absence of some sort of political consensus that action should be taken. If all of these come together, the policy window is open and change is possible. But that policy window will not remain open indefinitely. One example of a policy window potentially opening in Australia was the case of the bushfires. And the government has set up a royal commission to investigate aspects of that. Royal commissions in what we use in Australia to undertake major reviews of significant events or of significant issues within the community. They can often lead to significant and lasting change in terms of new policy directions. So something like the Royal Commission could be useful, but it depends on how the problem has been framed in terms of the task that the Royal Commission has been given. Because how a policy is framed is critical, and you can look at events in a number of different ways. And the perspective that you take on the event will often direct you towards likely solutions. So how a problem is framed or defined will shape solutions. In the case of the Royal Commission that's been set up after the bushfires in Australia, the terms of reference suggest that the government has framed the problem in terms of government response, in terms of how the national and state governments interacted with one another when we had these sort of major bushfires and, everything else that was going on, whether, what sort of coordination was occurring across levels of government or within government or with other communities. So the way the problem has been framed for this Royal Commission is largely along the lines of organisation and capacity to respond. It hasn't been framed in terms of, well, why did Australia have these unprecedented fires? Did it have something to do with the fact that the climate is changing and, you know, action might be taken around that? So this is really, I think, an illustration of how problem framing is really very critical, because I suspect that this Royal Commission will not lead to any significant policy around climate change in Australia. And it is because of the way it has been, the task it's been given. So a further lesson that can be learnt from the Australian experience with climate change policy is that to succeed in terms of getting your policy accepted and it having some sort of impact is that you need to actually have an advocacy coalition working with you. You need to be part of, you know, sort of a community. It doesn't have to be a formal one, it can be quite informal. But there needs to be a broad range of interests who are prepared to work together to realise the goal. And it provides support for policy change, and it can provide resources. And it needs to coordinate its activities, obviously, to get to the successful outcome. In Australia, there was no effective advocacy coalition, despite the huge level of support for doing something. The government couldn't get its legislation through the parliament. It could not even get the support of the Greens. For the Greens, it didn't go far enough. For the Conservative opponents, it went too far. But surely the government could have created a coalition of sort of shared interest with the Environmental Party. But this did not happen, and that actually was the reason why it didn't get. If the Greens had supported the legislation, it would have passed, but they didn't. So you can see there the importance of having a coalition of interest that is supporting your proposal, your concerns, and wants to see some action, and is prepared really to be quite pragmatic about that. So the final slide, the final lesson that I want to mention in my presentation is, in many respects, it's a very obvious one, but it is about the policy solutions that are put forward. They have to be workable, and by being workable, they need to be not sort of ideal in the sense of being what we would call first best, you know, this is the perfect way to proceed, but something that can be accepted, something that can be, you know, largely adopted. So workable solutions are operationally feasible and politically acceptable. They often are compatible with what is already existing, and in that case, they will be more easily implemented. If they, you know, they're not starting absolutely from scratch, if they build on something that's there, or they appear to supplement existing policy, this is a lot easier for people to accept. Policy solutions also need to maximise support and minimise grievances. Now, there will always be some opposition to change, but that needs to be minimised. The way the solution is crafted should minimise that opposition as much as possible and make sure that any opponents can be sort of isolated, and, you know, that the narrative around their opposition can be readily explained away. And so the policy changes also need to be interwoven with an existing narrative, you know, something that maybe builds on things from the past and then obviously can sort of lead into the future and thus be effectively advocated by political leaders. So they are three fairly elementary lessons around effective policy making that I wanted to stress in this presentation today. And I think that the very sad and unsatisfactory case of climate change policy in Australia really emphasises that there is a real need for policymakers to think very carefully and strategically about how they proceed in order to achieve the best sort of possible outcomes that they can in the circumstances that they are working in. So in concluding my presentation this afternoon, I thank you for your attention, and I'd also like to invite Pak Tri to respond as someone who has been very much a policy practitioner in Indonesia, advising government on very sort of critical issues and in very senior capacity. I'd be very interested to hear from Pak Tri in terms of his views on policy and making effective policy. Thank you.
Certain issue. So I would like to share my presentation here regarding your presentation. This is actually my experience, myself, also my colleagues, and also my team at the time. I was developing what I call it this developing policy in practice. So it started when I came back from the US study for applied economics. I developed writing some what I call it important public concern. So this part from policy formulation. So I write in the newspaper. This must be criteria. One is will be genuine and directed towards solving the problem. So that's coming interest from many academician, practitioner. So I would say, like right now, the people think academician is only theory. No, that's wrong. So academician also practitioner. So what I call it professor and practice. So other thing that's important is based on knowledge. Just it's important because it's caring about the people's interest and fairness, and also scientific based information. So that's the importance of academia, how to develop on scientific base to formulate a policy. And the other thing is should be based on evidence. So it's easily to explain when you are stated the policy in based on evidence. And the last, if you start with population formulation, I start with writing for chair of National Ocean Policy in Indonesian Ocean Council, and I chair also the Ocean Economic Policy. I chair also the Ocean Government. Then become the draft of what at the time I was chair also drafting the Ocean Act. So then increasing public awareness. You mentioned important thing at how coalition advocacy is important. So it must be a continuous expose of justification and proposed policy. It must be media coverage, especially right now when social media and other digital information is all over people. You can check every day, and this media coverage is very important. And other what we should do to develop policy is close interaction, cooperation with stakeholders. This is policymakers at the time, with ministers and also House representative member of the chairman of the setting. So discuss what the policy, and that's important of politician. And this must be an intensive discussion and shared policy idea. I came to several seminar discussion with different activist community, and we will find another step that's important. We can see what is called policy adoption. So when we are talking about policy adoption, we are dealing with struggling with developing solid agenda public policy. We talk with different parties, we talk with different organizations. Then, if we finish with the policy formulation, it must be somebody that has experience in developing legal drafting. So I call it policy drafting. Then we'll be channeling policy through government, public institution. Initially will be House of Representatives, the President with the Minister. And in Australia, with many changing of the government, it's really difficult when there is a changing Prime Minister. So then this is coming. It must be strong and agile. This is adoption because of political changing, political arena change. So will be strong, agile advocacy for political process. Then finally, after I remember maybe 9 years, start from the draft of Ocean Act, then finally become Ocean Act. Ocean Act is Act number 32 in 2014. That's at the time is paying off the long effort, and it's hopefully help to Indonesia become love the ocean and contribute for the welfare of the country. Thank you, Deirdre. That's the experience that we can share, and also for the audience participant, it might be using this our discussion or the future of the efficient on policy development. Thank you.
Thank you for the interesting lecture, and Professor Tridoyo for the feedback. It is fascinating story from Professor O'Neill that she has told us about the discourse and changing public opinion developed in Australia within the last decade, and how this influenced the public policy on climate change in Australia, which definitely influenced the economy, of course. And I noted that the challenge is how to align policy problem. I mean, like that we really have to be clear in understanding the problem with the plausible solution and the political climate. I think this is very important note that should be considered by the policymakers and stakeholders who are dealing with the issue. And I think this lecture becomes more interesting because we combine two, let's say, experience of history from the climate change story that, and then now we come to our topic that we are talking about, the ocean economics. And we know that oceans comprises or faces many problems in terms of economy, in terms of politics and so on. So, like for example, that the dispute that has been explained by Professor Tridoyo before, and also like maybe we also have some many problems on unsustainable use of marine resource, for example, and how then public policy should be designed to address or to find solutions on the problems of the ocean. And I would like to invite questions from participants. Yeah, we still have like only 10 minutes actually for this lecture. Probably one or two questions can be facilitated for the rest of the time. So yeah. Yeah, anybody can raise hands up, but I cannot see who has raised hand here. So, okay.
Hello.
Pak Rizky Erdian, please.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, Bu Eva. My name is Rizky, one of IPB student. I got two questions here. First, maybe it's for Prof. Tridoyo regarding the Indonesia position right now. Are we in the good direction towards what you call as blue society right now? Not to mention the last Indonesian government decision to repeal the ban for exporting the lobster seeds, for example. So I would like to hear your opinion about our plan regarding the sustainability in the ocean. And then the second question for Professor Anil, regarding the making a good public policy, as you mentioned a lot of things that we have to learn from the past. Then I'm questioning whether a democratic country can make a solid public policy to solve a problem, because as we know, in the democratic country, then the government will keep changing and the decision will keep changing. Then there will be no such solid policy that can solve a big problem that need a long time to resolve. That's the question. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Pak Rizky. I think first, Prof. Tridoyo would like to answer the questions, please.
Thank you, Mas Rizky. That's a really good question or warm discussion and discourse about the policy, especially regarding the lobster, export lobster. But I would like to start with more proud. So in the first period of President Jokowi, with a maritime country and also sort of the maritime world, that's I expect some big policy that give the impact for ocean economy. But in the second term of the President Jokowi, it's limited action, especially regarding the ocean policy and implementation of maritime country. Then it must be somebody, it's institution or us, remind that our future is ocean. So the blue ocean, blue society cannot be reached is only for the economic activity, but more importantly is sustainability of the ocean, and especially for the lobster. So we are just, to make the decision must be what I mentioned is scientific reason. So right now, how many lobster can be exported and must be concerned in the production for Indonesia first. That's mean the fry of lobster must be cultured. Then if the capacity of production in Indonesia has been reached, or maybe some level of fry lobster can be exported, but should be Indonesia first, especially for the farmer and also for the fishermen. So I advise that should be sit together, just don't talk in media and also in the television. The different parties should be sit together and talk efficiently what the best of the sustainability of lobster economy in the future. So the efficiency of production based on the technology, then Minister of Marine Affairs and Fisheries should be develop that technology and of course share the farmer and also will give an incentive to develop lobster farmer and use all the resources for the best benefit of Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Tridoyo. The second question was addressed to Professor O'Neill. Professor O'Neill, please.
Yes. So thank you, Reski, for your question, which, as I understand it, was really asking whether, you know, democratic institutions are necessarily compatible with making good public policy. I think they are. I don't think, I mean, although, you know, I gave you a particularly unhappy example of public policy in Australia. There are examples in Australia of very good public policy being made. And at the time, for example, of the global financial crisis, the response of the Australian government, which was Prime Minister Rudd, 2008, the response was a very good one. And effectively, it meant that Australia escaped the worst effects of the global financial crisis and was really seen around the world as having, you know, the government's response was seen as being a very good one. But I think one of the issues that you have in a country like Australia is that we have elections quite frequently, every 3 years nationally, and that creates a bit of a, you know, you get short-term thinking around that. But, you know, that often the government doesn't look much beyond what will work for the next election, you know, so what we call short-termism. So that's a bit of an issue in Australia. Another one is that once upon a time, we essentially had two main political parties or groupings, and one of those would form the government. That two-party system has declined, and there are now a lot of smaller parties as well that, given some sort of aspects of our voting system, get to have a bit of a say, get to have people in the Senate and elsewhere. So the two-party system has less influence and is less effective than it used to be. And I think another factor that has contributed to that decline of the two-party system is that overall in Australia, there has been a general decline in trust in institutions, and government is one of those institutions. So some of you would be familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer that comes out at the beginning of every year, which measures trust in countries all around the world, trust in government, trust in business, trust in the media, trust in non-government organisations. Unfortunately, levels of trust have declined a great deal, particularly for government. So when people are less trustful of government, they then tend to be less trustful of the main political parties, and they then tend to, you know, support smaller ones. And this creates obstacles in our system in terms of overcoming something like the climate change dilemma. So I don't think it's so much that democracy itself is incompatible. But I think that there are certainly factors at the moment that are creating challenges, and challenges not only in Australia. We can see them around the world with Brexit in the United Kingdom, and what's happening in other countries as well. But it's a very interesting issue that you raise, and one that certainly gives us a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much.
Prof. O'Neill, so I noted that trust plays important factors to shape the policy change, and I think this also applies to many countries, like Indonesia. Yeah, of course, we have different conditions, political conditions with Australia, but I think in many aspects we can learn about the discourse about the changing in public opinion and how this will influence the policy making. And I think that it's time. We have already at 3 o'clock, at 3 p.m. today, so we are really approaching the close the session, and probably some notes that maybe I can highlight for today's lecture. That ocean has a very important role in the economy, and this needs a very, very strong policy. And learning from the experience in Indonesia and in Australia, we know that to enhance the policy really involves so much energy, times, and of course kind of negotiations and stuff. And there are many requirements that we need to comply with in order to really align the policy, the solution that we will formulate with the problem. So the most important that how the common visions or the common interpretations of the problem should be clear at the first, because a different interpretation of the problems will lead to different solutions, and this will lead, of course, to the different interests, and at the end will be conflict. So how this can be consolidated? Professor Tridoyo has told that policymakers should communicate. They have to sit together and communicate, and the communicate means that they do brainstorming and then understanding the problems and have the same understanding on the problem and then formulate the solution. I think this is some important message that we can get from this lecture. So many thanks for the participants who have attended this lecture. I hope this lecture gives benefits to all of us, gives inspirations, and probably also give ideas for you who have been dealing with this issue in your work or in your study. And we would like to see you in the next lecture that will be informed in the short future. So see you in the next sessions.
Bye-bye, Deirdre.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come to Bogor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would love to.
Thank you, Prof.
Terima kasih.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, participants.
Okay.
Gentlemen.